It's Thursday, the 20th February 2025. Let's take a look at the headlines making waves in Nigeria today. First, the Punch newspaper. The leading story: Nigeria may miss $603 million fund. Senate summons service chiefs. Borno asks federal government to lead probe. USAID 2025 budget targets defense. Health, others. You can get all of this story on page 2 of the Punch newspaper. And above the leading story from the left, Dangote, NNPCL refineries not supplying 50% local fuel demand, says federal government. You can get the complete story on page 31 of the Punch newspaper. CBN probes 19.7 million dormant bank accounts. You can get the complete story on page 31 of the Punch newspaper. Visa. Again, CDS defends handling of Canadian visa application. You can get the complete story on page 16 of the Punch newspaper. Federal government demands $81 billion from Binance for alleged tax evasion. You can get the complete story on page 16 of the Punch newspaper. And below the leading story, Zamfara explosion. Ex-Governor Yari pays hospital bills as Nema visits victims. You can get the complete story on page 5 of the Punch newspaper. Lagos Assembly. Obasa denies stockpiling arms. Merenda refutes resignation claim. You can get the complete story on page 24 of the Punch newspaper. Policeman complainant arrested over new wet's death in custody. You can get the complete story on page 5 of the Punch newspaper. LG autonomy. CBN 774 chairman differs over council's account opening. You can get the complete story on page 23 of the Punch newspaper. Moving over to the next paper, Nigerian Tribune. The leading story: alleged funding of Boko Haram by USAID. Senate invites NSA, NIA, DSS chiefs. You can get the complete story on page 4 of the Tribune. And above the leading story from the left, illegal dissolution of LG treasonable, says AGF. You can get the complete story on page 23 of the Tribune. Nigeria sue Binance for $81.5 billion economic tax losses. You can get the complete story on page 23 of the Tribune. And below the leading story from the left, Kayari dispels fuel quality rumor, says it's bad marketing antics. You can get the complete story on page 11 of the Tribune. Edo Assembly sacks all political appointees. You can get the complete story on page 5 of the Tribune. KBAPC holds rally, declares support for Tinubu. Adopt Idris for second term. President has been fair to all, says Bagudu. You can get the complete story on page 3 of the Tribune. Osun Assembly condemns takeover of LG secretariats by APC. You can get the complete story on page 4 of the Tribune. Moving over to the next paper, The Guardian. The leading story: Council autonomy funding. AGF, EFCC talk tour. Caution governors, LG bosses on treason fraud. You can get the complete story on page 6 of The Guardian. And above the leading story from the left, visa denier. Nigeria won't brook disrespect from any country, says DHQ. You can get the complete story on page 3 of The Guardian. Federal government slams Binance with fresh $81.5 billion suit over economic sabotage. You can get the complete story on page 3 of The Guardian. And below the leading story from the left, Ohaneze, Asaba of Asaba, Wogu, others mourn Clark Adebanjo. You can get the complete story on page 29 of The Guardian. Nigeria secures 1.6 billion naira AI investment from Microsoft. You can get the complete story on page 15 of The Guardian. Akpabio meets Tinubu as Senate summons intelligence chiefs over USA terrorism claims. You can get the complete story on page 6 of The Guardian. Don't let us soon descend into chaos. Speaker, Olajebesi tell Tinubu, APC. You can get the complete story on page 5 of The Guardian. Lagos Assembly denies mass defection rumors. You can get the complete story on page 5 of The Guardian. Federal government bans 60,000-litre petrol tankers as accidents claims 3,500 lives. You can get the complete story on page 2 of The Guardian. Moving over to the next paper, Daily Trust. The leading story. Federal government to bar 60,000-litre fuel tankers from roads March 1. Policy will cost truck owners 300 billion naira, says NATO. 172 oil truck accidents, 1,896 deaths reported since 2009. You can get all of this story on page 4 of the newspaper and above the leading story from the left. Osun Council crisis deepens as sacked chairmen take over LGs. You can get the complete story on page 10 of the newspaper. Why we engage another service provider for 2025 Hajj, says NACON. You can get the complete story on page 3 of the newspaper. Visa denier. Nigeria won't tolerate disrespect from any country, says CDS. You can get the complete story on page 6 of the newspaper and below the leading story from the left. AGF to governors. Sacking elected LG chairs is treason. You can get the complete story on page 4 of the newspaper. Man kills friend after serving him meal. You can get the complete story on page 3 of the newspaper. Battle of Wits. Lagos, other state assemblies involved in speakership crisis. You can get the complete story on page 33 of the newspaper. Senate summons NSA, DSS, NIA over US AIDS terrorism funding allegation. You can get the complete story on page 3 of the newspaper. Moving over to the next paper, Vanguard, the leading story. US AIDS sponsorship of Boko Haram. Senate summons NSA, DGs of DSS, NIA, DIA. You can get all of this story on page 5 of the Vanguard and above the leading story. Nigeria imports 25 million litres of petrol daily. Federal government confirms. You can get the complete story on page 19 of the Vanguard. Osun LG crisis. Adeleke kicks as APC takes over secretariats. You can get the complete story on page 10 of the Vanguard. Adebanjo, EK Clark. How death of two titans in 3 days shock Nigeria. You can get the complete story on page 15 of the Vanguard. Senate to federal government. Name national monument after Edwin Clark. You can get the complete story on page 7 of the Vanguard. Fiscal autonomy. Why CBN hasn't released funds to 774 LGAs, says federal government. You can get the complete story on page 8 of the Vanguard and below the leading story from the right. Roads. Why we are not championing concrete technology, says Umahi. You can get the complete story on page 9 of the Vanguard. Rivers community battles MPDC over alleged diversion of oil wells. You can get the complete story on page 12 of the newspaper. US aid. Nigeria's average $1 billion annual receipt from US under threat. You can get the complete story on page 22 of the Vanguard. PDP crisis. Court declines to stop INEC from recognizing Ayawo's sack. You can get the complete story on page 9 of the Vanguard. Visa denier. Nigeria won't tolerate disrespect from any country, says CDS. You can get the complete story on page 8 of the Vanguard. Lookman slams deeply disrespectful manager. You can get the complete story on page 38 of the Vanguard. Moving over to the last paper on the list, Business Day, the leading story. Medical fund dormant as bills choke Nigeria's poor. You can get the complete story on page 31 of the newspaper and beside the leading story from the left. Prime office occupants shrinks as developers rethink options. You can get the complete story on page 30 of the newspaper. ECOWAS, Nigerian passport wakens as Mali Burkina Faso, Niger withdraw. You can get the complete story on page 30 of the newspaper. Cost of living crisis persists amid 15 trillion naira FAC payouts. You can get the complete story on page 31 of the newspaper. And these are the headlines making waves in Nigeria today. If any of these headlines caught your attention, do get a copy of the paper to read the complete story.
Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates.
Housing TV Africa, your first in housing development broadcasting.